Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So, welcome to Jilly Juice yet again. Yesterday, wow, yesterday I went through more biochemical changes in my environment, and I felt the temperature go up and down, up and down. And that is a symptom, like one of the symptoms of menopause. Now, I'm not saying that I have menopause, but that's some of the symptoms of like hot flashes, like menopause, for some women who are entering into that stage of their life where the body is shutting down, and so is their reproductive system. But it also, when you get temperatures that rise and fall, it's the body recalibrating itself. So, when you're doing the Jilly Juice, you're going to feel the temperatures rise and fall as your biochemistry finally adapts to the new conditions. But anyways, I was talking about microbiomes last night and imprints because I was, talking about the addiction and how addiction leaves an imprint, and that's why it's passed down in families. So if you have an alcoholic father and mother, there is an imprint on the genetics. And if you have like 5 kids, you may have like maybe 3 out of the 4 or 2 out of the 4. I mean, it's hard to know the distribution of those type of genetics, but you'll have at least one kid that's going to be turning to alcohol as a go-to for whatever. They will exhibit the qualities of an alcoholic because it's an imprint. It's epigenetics. That's what imprints are. That's what addiction is. It comes from epigenetics. It's an imprint. It's not only taught, but it's genetically passed down from generation to generation. And so that's why, doctors ask your family medical history because they want to know what you are susceptible to. What are you inheriting? So they know how to figure out your whole medical plan. Okay, so microbiomes hold those genetic imprints. Okay, what's in your poop holds those genetic imprints. Well, what are these genetic imprints and how are they able to still stay in the body? Well, I mean, yes, it's DNA being imprinted, but also too, your poop holds a lot of it. I mean, when the mother is growing the child in her uterus, and she has those genetic imprints in her poop, and then the baby is taking in the nutrients from her and inheriting those genetics. It goes into the baby's microbiome. Okay, that's how things get passed down. And so with the whole thing with the Jilly Juice is that it clears away the old imprint. It's like you are getting a new microbiome with the Jilly Juice. And so you have to understand now with all of these things with the antibodies and the blood types. Okay, I was listening to CNN and listening to the doctors like Sanjay Gupta, and they are looking for a vaccine, or they're looking at how the viruses are affecting the population, and they're like, wow, it's not binding. We want these viruses to bind to give us this constant protection. Okay, or these antibodies, I'm not sorry, viruses will bind, but we want these antibodies to bind to give this constant protection. And you know what, when you have an antibody that attaches to a virus, well, a virus needs a host. Okay, so they're not taught, they're telling you only like maybe 2/3 of the information. So if they are trying to create antibodies, a vaccine that creates antibodies that binds to the virus, well, it has to bind to the host. And when it binds to the host, it will create then it'll create antigen and then a continuous amount of antibodies. And that's where the blood types come in. Because blood types is surface marker antigen. When you have surface marker antigen, those are the antibodies that bind to those specific cells, and they continuously create antibodies. And then what happens is they agglutinate, and they can potentially immobilize. And this is where they've done the research, and I showed you in my heading that these antibodies for fish can actually immobilize a fish. So what could happen to a human when they're getting these antibodies that bind to the virus that is bound to the host? Okay, so you got to understand that the reason why it's great that, well, the reason why they're afraid of these antibodies that are not staying in the system long enough is because we have people who are so malnourished, who are so nutritional deficient, who have predispositions and imbalances. They won't be able to handle the upgrade, because every single time you get exposed to a new virus, it'll create more antibodies. You have to keep upgrading, and most people are pretty much they're weak. They can't really upgrade to the new environment, and so what happens is that they eventually their body will immunize themselves out of existence because they don't have enough minerals to deal with the upgrade. And then also too, why you're seeing a high, like I'm watching my friends right now on Facebook who have been dealing with cancer or some kind of issue for the longest time, finally have to go get chemotherapy because they can't handle the environment, because those antibodies are agglutinating whatever it is they're exposed to. It is causing more anomalies to their cells, and then those cells are replicating, and there's that genetic imprint that is causing a miscommunication between all the systems, and so everything is misfiring, and they're seeing now an uptick in their cancer. Okay, so at this point, you're going to see after, once they figure out a new vaccine, and you know that's coming down the line, a new vaccine is coming down the line, and it's going to be antibodies binding to the virus, which is bound to the host, and you're going to see, yes, more diagnosable diseases. However, those on the jelly juice will be able to flush out the excess antibodies, but those not on the J juice are going to see now a new blood type. It's not going to be a blood type A, B, and O. It's going to be like we're seeing people have blood type D. There's going to be so many other blood types because of the amount of antibodies that are binding to the virus, that are bound to the host, you're the host, causing then different exotic diseases. And unfortunately, until science and medicine and the holistic allopathic world realize that they have to keep upgrading the host to handle this environment, every single time they try to go and mess with your genetics by using vaccines that have antibodies that bind to the virus, that bind to the host, causing anomalies, you're going to see then a lot of major imbalances, a lot of new diagnosable diseases, and yes, new blood types. Remember when I talked about that when you have so many antibodies merging together that are aggregating, it's called agglutination, and then they will immobilize, they will turn into an autoimmunity, which then causes these diseases. Agglutination, when you have an antibody bound to a virus, bound to the host, and then it replicates and it agglutinates, that is autoimmunity. And that's exactly what they're doing. That's why it's so imperative, because if they're looking for something that's going to bind to the host and bind to the virus, you've got to do the J juice to help with the programming to deal and flush away and energize your immune system. Those that are not on the J juice are going to fall victim to not only the virus, because they're going to keep getting hit by different strains, and that's what the medical community is concerned with, is the fact that if there is no antibody that's binding to the virus, binding to the host, then they'll keep getting hit by new strains and they'll keep dying or getting diagnosable diseases. So then, but the other side of it is not that good either. I mean, when you're getting an antibody that binds to the virus, that binds to the host, and the host is you, that's not going to be good for a person who has medical issues, who already has predispositions. So it's like the lesser of the two evils. Well, there really is no lesser of the two evils relative to your predispositions. What's going to be the universal actual answer to all this? It's going to be jelly juice, because you're not creating antibodies, It's not antibiotic. You are creating, well, it's probiotic, but it's not just probiotics. It's also the salt, which is energizing force, and it's the nutrition, and it's the fermentation, which is the probiotics, and it's the nutrition in the cabbage and the kale, and the water is the carrier force. And then you have to go and change your microbiome so you don't have that imprint of what your parents did to you or did not do for you, or what anyone else has imprinted, left an imprint on you, whether it's abuse, whether it's PTSD, whether it's just, some natural disaster that you're still dealing with, like a fire or an earthquake or war. Okay, so no matter what, you're going to have to change your imprints. You have to change your microbiome. And these antibodies, which is in my book, I mean, I do have a section on antibodies in my book. That is what causes people to die. When you have too many antibodies in the body, that's antibiotic, that causes death. Yeah, it creates some sort of protection, I guess. But what is protection? I mean, what is protection? So you don't feel something? So you can't adapt? Okay? I mean, that's the thing, is that antibodies are supposed to be something that is temporary, and then it leaves the body. Once your body adapts and those antibodies kind of keep the balance so the body can handle that upgrade, so it's like an intermediary, it's not supposed to stay in your body indefinitely. And that's what the medical holistic community is doing, is they're wanting to keep these antibodies in your body indefinitely. And when you keep those antibodies in your body indefinitely, it actually causes degradation. But then how does a person get protected, and how do they survive all these new, viruses in the environment? Well, you keep upgrading your body with nutrition. You keep maintaining a very well-balanced biochemistry, body, mind, and spirit, with the right chemistry. Okay? It's all about chemistry. You can have the chemistry of anti-life, or you can have a chemistry of pro-life. But remember, there's only two laws in this world. There's only two absolutes. Like I told the Federal Trade Commission dude, and I was on the phone with him when he was telling me that, you can't tout cures. Well, you're absolutely right. There's no absolutes when it comes to cures. Because they're not talking about one specific law. They're trying to mess with how much time you have between life and death, because the FTC, as well as the medical holistic community, still believe in death. So there is no absolutes when it's between life and death, but there is an absolute when it's life or death, not between life and death, because that's all relative to your predispositions and how much time you really have left on this earth based upon your telomeres. But there are absolutes with life and death. And when you're getting antibodies that are binding to the virus, which is bound to the host, creating antigen and then creating antibodies, because that's what it is. It's antigen that bind to the virus, bind to the host, creating antibodies, and they're bound there and they're stuck there. That is what causes then the death and degradation and cancer, disease, and chronic illness. You're supposed to just be exposed to this antigen for a short amount of time, and the body creates antibodies, like the inflammation that you see, because it's adaptation. And then when you do the J juice, it sweeps out the excess. You sweep out that imprint. Well, the imprint's still there, but it's not taking over your body. What happens is that these imprints, like addiction, like autoimmunity, is that the imprint of those antibodies, of that antigen that you were exposed to way back when, is now taking over your body. It's like being possessed by antibodies, by that virus that you were exposed to, that instead of you just taking what you needed and leaving the rest, you just kept that, like you hoarded that data of that virus, and now that virus is taking over your body. Because viruses have a place, they have a role. It's like they're supposed to be like a hit and skip. They're not supposed to be, the data is not supposed to be staying and imprinting and taking over your life, like a hoarder who keeps hoarding all of this, these things from the community, baskets and whatever it is that they're hoarding, cars and parts and vacuums and vacuum cleaners and papers and dolls and all that stuff. When you watch the hoarding shows, that's exactly what the medical holistic community wants you to do, is they want you to hoard antibodies until it ultimately destroys you. Oh, but you don't feel pain, you don't feel any inflammation. And that's exactly the same premise with the vaccines. as well as, with, when you catch a virus, the same premise with the virus, I mean, when with the jelly juice is that, yeah, you're supposed to catch the virus, of course, but it's supposed to be short-lived, okay, where you're not going to be, reacting, but every time the virus changes because somebody out there is sick and they're communicable, and then you have to go and recalibrate to a new virus. But that's just the nature of the beast. When you live with 7 billion people, someone's always going to mutate stuff, but you will know what it is and you won't react to it, in such a way, and you will keep upgrading yourself to the new environment. But in the vaccine world and biotech, okay, it's still data for the right person. That's great for the right person, but for the wrong person, which is everybody that's not doing JJUS, all of those viruses will create, and the vaccines will create antibodies that people are going to hoard because they won't know how to release the excess. And that ultimately will look like something in a hoarding show on A&E, where you will see then the death and degradation of that person and that family genetic line. So that's why it's so important to do JJUS. So that way you're not hoarding antibodies that are binding to the viruses, that are binding to the host, causing anomalies in cancer, disease, and chronic illness. It hit me when I was listening to Sanjay Gupta because the science sounds great on the news. Some layperson that's listening to how these vaccines work, which I can understand. I understand the vaccine industry and understand the necessity for it when people have issues with adapting to their environment. However, there is a double-edged sword. And when you have these antibodies binding to the virus, binding to the host is you, and then they glutinate, and then potentially you will see autoimmune, cancer, disease, chronic illness, and immobilize a person. It's called death. So that's something, that's why, you do JJUS to then sweep out the old microbiome and keep adapting to the new ones. I'm going to go right now, but you guys sleep on that, chew on that for a minute, because that's some pretty heavy shit. It's in plain sight. Just watch CNN and their medical people. We got to find a virus vaccine that will bind to the virus and then bind to the host. Remember, the virus needs a host. You're the host. Bye.